Okay, I set the recording. Let's give it like one more minute. All right, do you want to kick it off, Blaine?
Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody. Really excited to be here with everybody today because, quite frankly, Common Cartridge is a standard that needs a little bit of love, and we are here to give that love today. I am very, very excited to be working along with Bracken on Common Cartridge 1.4 in the Common Cartridge Working Group. There's so many great things that are now packed into the new version of 1.4 that, we got together and said, we really need to put together a presentation at Lilly just to cover all of the new cool stuff that's in here. And I have a feeling that by the end of this presentation, you're going to agree with us that the new Common Cartridge version 1.4 update is one of the biggest updates that has ever been made to Common Cartridge. It is huge. It brings all of the things that you're looking for finally together into one cartridge, and we start to get into new territory that Common Cartridge really hasn't ever gone into before, and it's extremely powerful now. And we need to get folks throughout the tech ecosystem to support it. And so really this is not just a session around what's in Common Cartridge 1.4, but it's an evangelizing session to really get everybody on board with the idea that this new Common Cartridge update is the one that you want to add into your LMS, and the one that if you're in a higher education environment or you're in a business, an ed tech business, that you're going to want to use Common Cartridge in some new and novel ways that you might not have considered before. So with that, let's dive in and get started. So let me introduce, or actually, Bracken, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Bracken Mosbacker. I work at IMS. I'm the architect for Common Cartridge and some of the other specifications. I've been a Common Cartridge nerd for over a decade now, since I first implemented it. And I'm really excited to talk about it today, as always.
Awesome. I love that you're a Common Cartridge nerd. That's great. I'm going to adopt that personally as well. Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks, Bracken. And I am Blaine Helmick, and my enormous face is on the right-hand side of the screen here. I am from ACT. I'm the interim director of the Emerging Technology Division at ACT. And I've been in the business for a really long time. Been with IMS for a really long time through a couple of different companies. But I'm really excited to be working here with ACT, with IMS on Common Cartridge. I'm a participant in a few other groups, but Common Cartridge is one of those standards that's near and dear to my heart because it's just so practical. You can really do a lot of stuff with it. But with that said, a little bit about ACT. We're obviously known for the test, right? Everybody knows ACT is the test company, but we actually do a lot more beyond just the test. So we're more than just a test company. We do a lot of thought leadership in the industry, with IMS. We also are a huge research organization. So to us, standards like Common Cartridge and all the peripheral standards that you're going to see here in a moment, CASE, LTI, etc. They all blend into Common Cartridge. So it's all part of our thread. It's part of our DNA at ACT to use and leverage emerging standards and help move those standards forward. So really excited to be here with you guys today as part of ACT. All right. So let's talk about the legacy of Common Cartridge, because Common Cartridge has been around for a long time, right? And it is not a new standard. And in many ways, it was extremely useful, particularly at the beginning. Virtually every learning platform and system that's out there, a tech system, supports Common Cartridge in some form or fashion, but a lot of them, the old versions, version 1, version 1.1. There are a few out there that support 1.3, within Common Cartridge, but it's not ubiquitous. And in a way, the support for it's kind of died off. And that's not to say that Common Cartridge wasn't great. It was great. It is great. But the challenge is that it just doesn't support the most modern things. So what was Common Cartridge for at the beginning? Common Cartridge was a way for you to take your stuff and put it together into an archive, describe it in some way, and then deliver your stuff to something else, to a learning platform, maybe between one learning platform and another, or maybe it's an assessment generator, a cool ed tech tool that lets you build an assessment, and then you take a Common Cartridge out, you can put it into your learning platform. So it did that very well. But the challenge is that there's been a lot of evolutions of standards. QTI, for example, has evolved, but because the QTI standard itself was baked into Common Cartridge, there were challenges with supporting those new versions as they emerged, sort of limiting the future capability of Common Cartridge. In addition, there were really no support for all of the types of things that you might want to do inside of your learning platform, such as an assignment. So making an assignment and being able to put just a simple assignment inside of your Common Cartridge really wasn't a supported thing until now, right? So we've made a lot of really great changes to Common Cartridge 1.4, but it's important to understand where we came from. And I think the real challenge at the moment is the fragmentation in the LMS ecosystem. So there's just not consistent support among all of the different learning platforms and ed tech tools that are out there. And it's our hope that with all the new capability that's being baked into 1.4, that's gonna, this is gonna be the standard that's gonna be that momentum and get that change. So fragmentation is no longer an issue.
Blaine,
so, yes.
Something I like to think about for the legacy of Common Cartridge and kind of give some context of where I think we're going. IMS has an even older standard called content packaging, which is what Common Cartridge and QTI's packaging is based off of. And content packaging is really very expansive. You can define and put anything in those packages as you want. Even SCORM, you picked it up and used it. So a lot of people were using that. But because it supported everything possible, it made it really hard for people to implement it. It made it hard to exchange those just because there's too many things possible. And the big thing that made Common Cartridge successful, I think, is that it limited the types of content it held to like 5 different things. It's like, look, you can put these things in here, everyone supports these, and then you can actually exchange these because people only have to implement these 5 things, and this is exactly how they work. And so it really was that restriction that made Common Cartridge able to be interoperable, because you can't exchange everything all the time. But it's also those restricted types and that tightness of that made it not as effective as it could be, because it's like the lowest common denominator of learning resources. And so I think where we're going with Common Cartridge 1.4 and in the future is we're trying to balance that a little bit better. We want to keep a core, here's these pieces that it works well for everyone, but if you need to add things or as new types of objects come in, we need to iterate quickly enough on Common Cartridge that we can actually support a broader set of pieces and support more types of learning resources. And so I think that's the balance that we're trying to hit here. And as we go through this presentation, I think you'll see a pretty good show of that balance of still a core interoperable part, but being able to extend it and solve new problems.
And that's a great segue, Bracken.
All right, should I just hit it?
Do it.
Will you let me share real quick?
Yeah.
So we're going to do a quick tour of some of the features of Common Cartridge 1.4, and there's just a lot of these features were there before too, but we're going to kind of talk about them. So something IMS has been emphasizing, not just Common Cartridge, is the IMS standard ecosystem working together. Each of the specs solves different things in different ways, but there really is a very cohesive way that a lot of these can work together. And Common Cartridge is a great central piece for some of that. And so as a slight introduction to some of the work we've been doing for Common Cartridge 1.4, I'm going to pop over to the IMS website. And this is the Common Cartridge page that you get to when you navigate through the top navigation. And what for Common Cartridge 1.4, we have all the new documentation down here. And something I'm excited particularly for is the improved implementation guide. there's some new sections in there and some reformatting, and I think it really makes a big difference on helping to understand Common Cartridge itself. And so the 1.4 work isn't just on the core spec itself, it's on the documentation to make it easier to understand how to utilize these features. And one of those sections in here that's new is called Common Cartridge in the IMS ecosystem. And what this section does, and we're trying to add this to lots of specifications, is it simply says, hey, if you're working with case, here's how Common Cartridge relates to that. If you're working with LTI, here's how Common Cartridge relates to that. LTI resource search, QTI, all those things. And so, as a first step of helping everyone understand the connective tissue that is Common Cartridge, this section is a great place to come to learn about that and see how you can actually utilize these other specifications. And I'll scroll through and I'll show off some of this work. And Common Cartridge, again, it's still solving the same problem it's been solving, which is bundling and storing learning content, and that's not going to change. But some of the new ways in the past, you were always able to put align learning resource to academic standards. In 1.4, we improved the case aspect of those alignments. And you can see it right here in this example, where now not only can you do the GUID and the label, you can also add a case item URI. So that's an actual link to a specific case standard. So someone who's creating these cartridges for archival purposes or importing them, you can always know exactly what kind of standards these items were aligned to. And that's for each individual resource and the whole cartridge as a whole. Not only are we making that a little bit easier and nicer to use in Common Cartridge, there's also a new Common Cartridge profile. We have thin and thick, and I won't dive in too deep to that. But we've also created this K-12 profile, which, let me get right here, is really the same thing as normal Common Cartridge, except for it requires some specific metadata that many K-12 districts are looking for. For example, curriculum standards metadata. For those importing tools that are, say an LMS that wants to say, I support curriculum standards in Common Cartridge, to get K-12 certified, you have to show that you actually utilize those curriculum standards that are aligned within the Common Cartridge, and other things like that. So again, we're trying to make it a lot more practical and easy to use this information inside the cartridges. A really big one, especially for me and Blaine as long-term Common Cartridge and LTI nerds, as I put it, one of the biggest downfalls and problems with Common Cartridge since the rise of LTI is that there was no standardized way inside a Common Cartridge in an LTI link to say this LTI link has a grade associated with it, that this is an assignment. Each of the LMSs kind of had little extra configuration ways you could do that, but there wasn't a standardized way. And so now there is, yay. And so what's that look like? It's pretty simple. It takes the LTI assignments and grades line item. So an assignment in LTI is called a line item in the gradebook. And it literally just takes how that's defined in LTI and makes that available inside a Common Cartridge LTI link. And it would look just like this. And the great thing is that how simple this is. If someone uses LTI and uses deep linking and likes to return grades with that, you can now package a whole module or multiple modules, and when it's imported into the LMS can look at this line item, grab the information in here, and as soon as it does an LTI launch, your gradebook is already set up. The process before was you'd have to import your cartridge, manually set up your gradebook and align those LTI links, and now that can all just happen at once in a standardized way. I'm very excited about that, having had to implement both sides of this at previous jobs, both the importing and generating these. It's exciting that we can actually solve some of these practical problems that we've been complaining about for years. Another one that I think is exciting is we've added some accessibility metadata. So IMS has had many accessibility initiatives and have done a lot of great work like Access for All and the other one that goes with Access for All, I can't think of in the moment. But we haven't done a good job at tying those, using those within other specs. And the W3C is, over the past few years, has been working with IMS and then has done their own accessibility work. And they have this thing called Web Schemas Accessibility, which is very broadly used, not for many learning resources and other just content out on the internet. And this is based on IMS Access for All work. And what we've done, because this W3C version has been so broadly adopted, IMS has adopted W3C's accessibility pieces for Common Cartridge and other specifications that will use it. And so we can now, inside a Common Cartridge, include this accessibility metadata. And what that looks like, so let's scroll to the documentation for that. We have a new beautiful metadata section in the documentation. Exciting reading, you should check it out. So how the accessibility works is you include the accessibility namespace, and then it looks just like, I probably should pop that up. And then you have resource accessibility metadata, and then for each of the same items that exist in the W3C, you can put it in here. So what this is particularly useful for is, oh, I have got an example from Blaine. I just remembered. So this is a manifest. Blaine's going to dive a little bit deeper into his specific example. I just threw on some extra metadata on here to talk about it. So this is a manifest. We've got some case alignments in here. We've got all that great stuff. But this cartridge has a bunch of LTI links in it. And traditionally, in most common cartridges, when you have LTI links, you don't know much information about those LTI links and what's behind them. And so one of the things we've done is made it so you can have more learning resource types than before. We've expanded what's available in Common Cartridge. So that helps describe these LTI links. But also, this page, this is an HTML page that has an embedded assessment, let's say, and images in it. With accessibility metadata, we can also say, this has alternative text. You can be very explicit. Or this one down here is a video, and with accessibility metadata, you can be like, and it's captioned. And you could find that out when you go to the page and check it out. But if you're using LTI resource search or deep linking or anything that wants to search and find these learning resources, having this metadata live with within the Common Cartridge allows you to set up searching that says, hey, I only want to see videos that have captions, and able to put little badges on the videos and search interfaces, and or being able to audit the materials you receive from a vendor, whether it has the accessibility needs, whether it meets your accessibility needs for your class. And so we're really hoping to help everyone understand how to use this metadata and utilize it, so that it becomes more common practice to include this in all the Common Cartridges, again, making it easier to discover and utilize this content. So it really is, as far as the implementation goes, quite simple. It's just you include it in there and it says it has captions. Simple and beautiful. Blaine referenced QTI. In Common Cartridge has an embedded native version of QTI. That's QTI like 1.2 or something like that, I think, or 1.2.1. And that hasn't changed for Common Cartridge 1.4. Its core assessments are still in that version of QTI. If we in the future do some new version of Common Cartridge, we would do some backwards incompatible release there or something to change that. But QTI 3 was released this year. I think this year, might have been last year. Time has no meaning these days. As a starter and a movement towards improving QTIs for inside Common Cartridge, you can include a QTI 3 zip file. So this isn't natively defined Common Cartridge quizzes, but you can include your assessments for systems that support QTI 3. And that's still growing. It's a new standard, and it doesn't have super broad support yet, but we're looking forward to people being able to package that, include that in there. So item types. The same item types exist in 1.4, but I did want to make a point in the documentation. That's right. So we keep emphasizing the ecosystem, and I referenced this already, but a specific example of that is LTI resource search, where we want Common Cartridge to work better with LTI resource search. And the LTI resource search has its own kind of set of metadata that aligns well to Common Cartridge, but it's not perfect, and it has its own set of resource types. And so as a specific example of how we try to improve Common Cartridge 1.4 is we've got a nice mapping here of how the Common Cartridge metadata maps to the resource search metadata, but also for the resource type specifically, Common Cartridge adopted the full list of LTI resource search content types. And that's what I showed in here a little bit, media, images, visual. So saying this LTI link in the end, or this LTI link is a video in the end. And it's in a consistent format to LTI resource search, making those a lot more compatible and allowing Common Cartridge to much more accurately describe the nature of a specific learning resource. So, that's expanding Common Cartridge's capability, but it's in a very interoperable way that makes it easier to describe the resources. So I think that's just a good example of, again, tying the ecosystem together. And I mentioned the K-12 profile that is meant to promote the use of metadata, and in some cases allow people to officially certify to show that they utilize that metadata. Do you have an explicit slide on extension stuff? I can't remember, Blaine.
We don't have the specific one on extensions, but the next one on the next slide is just the demo. So if you want to just flip over to that slide, and then we can go from there, and you can show some of those extensions.
Okay. So demo time. So I'll just mention extensibility a little bit with these examples I already have. So Common Cartridge already was extensible in 1.3. We made it so you can add new object types dynamically. That wasn't utilized by anyone. We had one we created, but it didn't really get implemented anywhere. And so for 1.4, we're trying to help everyone understand the extensibility attributes of Common Cartridge, I suppose. And so I'll give two examples with that line item accessibility, but we also got a nice section again in the new implementation guide that explicitly kind of goes over both extending the metadata and extending Common Cartridge as a whole. It talks about the different patterns that exist and how to utilize them. But as an example of, again, that balance we're trying to get of making it interoperable but adding new things, the line item one, for example, so here you don't need to worry about the details too much, but here's a line item inside an LTI link. And I mentioned that this is actually the line item as defined by LTI assignments and grades services. So assignments and grades has its own model. Here's the properties, how it exists. They define what properties are needed in there. And what we've done for Common Cartridge in this case is said, hey, when you want to add a line item, you just use that same definition. And it's say in the future, when LTI gets some new service that solves some other new problem and needs a set of metadata on an LTI link, the way that we did this by referencing other specifications and just allowing them to be embedded inside Common Cartridge will allow us to define, again, this new LTI thing over there, but we won't have to create a Common Cartridge 1.5 or a Common Cartridge 2 to utilize those new features over an LTI. We don't want to have to make Common Cartridge always track case and LTI and those other ones. And so by kind of utilizing the new concept of IMS of like a centralized common data model, Common Cartridge can just, as new things appear in other specs, those will be able to be defined in Common Cartridge. We could update the implementation guide by saying, hey, if you want to solve these problems, here's what you do. And people already implemented Common Cartridge would, just ignore these new pieces because they don't support them yet. So it's a very backwards compatible approach and flexible approach to adding these new types of objects in there. And that's the case for all over in Common Cartridge. And then the accessibility metadata is another example of that, where we have this definition out there, in this case W3C's definition, but we define that in a way that Common Cartridge can just grab it and embed it inside of a cartridge. And if that specification iterates and adds things, or we decide to add other types of features to it, Common Cartridge will be able to take advantage of those without having to do Common Cartridge 1.5 again. And this also applies to whole new object types and things like that. And so what we're trying to do is, again, establish, hey, when you think about Common Cartridge, yes, it's this core few data types, but it's really easy to add your own, and as a community decide, just like with that K-12 profile, which just enforces use of some of these pieces, say, hey, yes, Common Cartridge technically supports this, and as a community, we're promoting and getting people to actually utilize some of these systems in a nice, flexible, implementable way. And so that's what I'm really, one of the things, the two things I'm most excited about Common Cartridge are LTI links have line items, and the extensibility is well documented and used as part of Common Cartridge 1.4 with these two examples. So that's the two things I'm particularly excited about. Blaine, should I stop sharing now and you can take back over to do yours?
Sure. All right. So one of the things that I think is really, really important is to have a use case, right? To understand how things can be used. In particular, there's a lot that Bracken just covered around what's new in Common Cartridge 1.4. There's a lot of really, really intricate details because it weaves all of the different parts of IMS's specs really together into one offline package. So let me describe how we use Common Cartridge 1.4 and what our use case is. So we had a relatively, and I would call it simple need. We needed a cartridge that had LTI links in it that allowed us to put in our assignments for reinforcement of our curriculum, that we then had some formative assessment, real simple, you know, not complex, not a whole lot of stuff, but just simple formative assessment. Some kind of imagery that supports that lesson, helps you know, visualize, reinforce with additional modalities. Then we also wanted to have assignments, simple assignments that someone could turn in, again, as more of a reinforcement of a formative reinforcement of the material that they've learned. And then, of course, a case alignment, have them all aligned to standards. And then, of course, have everything with accessibility baked in, right? And that sounds like a lot of bullets, right, for a need. But the reality is that that's what we all need. You know, if you're an ed tech supplier, you're building curriculum. If you're a higher education, you know, university, and your professors are building content for their students. If you're a K through 12 school district and you're either working with a supplier or vendor, perhaps you're making your own. We all have these exact same needs. And so we needed at ACT to bring all these pieces together. And so what's really nice is that Common Cartridge 1.4 is what does bring them together. But 1.3 and the previous versions just didn't. And the reason they didn't is because it just didn't meet all those requirements. Not that the standard was bad, the standard was perfectly good for what it was. It just didn't bring all of those pieces together into one single cartridge. So what was really lacking is the ability of Common Cartridge to represent an entire learning object. It was a way to get stuff moved from one system to another. It was a way to kind of describe some of your content. That's great, but it wasn't an entire learning object into one single package. And that is what CC 1.4 does for us. So what we had to do in the past is, and we still have to do today until more LMSs support Common Cartridge 1.4, is that we have to use Moodle to transfer data to our customers. Not to say Moodle is bad, we love Moodle. So not trying to, you know, denigrate my Moodle friends out there, but the Moodle cartridge let us describe and deliver the curriculum to different LMSs in a way that Common Cartridge previous versions just couldn't. So we needed another way. And that's why I was so excited to work with Bracken and the Common Cartridge group on the new versions of 1.4, because as we've discussed, it's bringing everything together. Accessibility is baked in from the beginning with a standardized vocabulary. And this is the other really cool thing. So if you're an ed tech supplier or you're in higher ed, this is a really important takeaway for you guys. And that is, it's creating what we're kind of terming a cartridge of record. What does that mean, cartridge of record? Well, imagine you have a piece of learning content, right, that you you have created within your organization, whether you're a school or an ed tech supplier. And you want to be able to say, this learning object is done, right? How do you define done for a piece of learning curriculum? Well, you bring together all of the resources that are relevant, right? You bring together the standards that it's aligned to. You bring together resource links to, LTI resources where you may be physically launching or communicating out to your customers to launch and access that curriculum. You need to be bringing together your assessments, your formative assessments, your formative assignments, your discussion topics. All of those things need to come together, wrapped around standards, and then in a format that is also standard. And when you take a step back and you think about what you're producing, and I'll show you here in a second what one of the cartridges looks like, you're really creating a record, a cartridge of record around that specific learning object. So this is where I believe this is a game changer for how we think about common cartridge's role, because we used to think of it just as a way to move stuff or store stuff, and that's fine, it still does that. But it's also a way to describe that stuff such that you have a standard, essentially database of that learning object, and now have an object that you can rely on and know all of your alignments are there, all of your accessibility metadata is there, all of the extensions that you might need for your particular ed tech business or your higher education institution or your school or district is all baked in to one single cartridge of record. And of course, now what we need is for all the learning management systems to support it. But even without that support, this notion of a cartridge of record gives you the ability to adopt Common Cartridge 1.4 today. And as, of course, more folks adopt Common Cartridge, the newest version, that'll also push the industry as well.
And this is just the start of the Blaine and Bracken tour of pestering people to start implementing 1.4. And so these LMS folks will be getting a heavy dose of that over there.
I won't be leaving you alone. And I can talk a long time. Awesome. All right, so let me actually take you on a quick tour. Let's show you what this looks like. So I'm going to bring up a couple cartridges here. And this is the very same cartridge here on the left. I have another one on the right, and I'll show you in a second. But the one on the left is exactly what Bracken was showing you a moment ago. And as you can see, it's got what you would expect from Common Cartridge original, right? So it's got
that font up a little bit, Blaine.
Oh, of course, absolutely. 1 second. Let's. I'm getting a beach ball. 1 second.
You can try the Control Plus that often works in these. It might not.
Yeah, it does not. I'm on my text editor, so let's just bump this up here. Zoom in. That's not that much. Is that looking a little better?
I think it went up a little, yeah.
Okay, hopefully it's a little bit better.
The details aren't super important, but yeah, it's good.
Okay.
Thanks.
So the things that you've expected to be in a common cartridge, things like the description, they're all there, right? So that hasn't changed. But as Bracken mentioned, bringing together the GUIDs for case, right? So this one specific object, in fact, let me just show it to you. I've got it up over here. This is a really simple cartridge that has an example of one of our original founders for our social and emotional learning. His name is Maui Asgadone. He's a super cool dude. Shout out to him. Connect with him on LinkedIn, by the way. He's an amazing dude. And we have his origin story. Any good superhero needs an origin story, and Maui is definitely my superhero. So we have his origin story here in the common cartridge, which, by the way, is linked at the end of the presentation. You'll be able to download it as well. And it's just a really simple example of the kind of learning object that you might want to put inside of a common cartridge. Simple HTML page with some images linked into them. Of course, you can get a lot more complex, and we simplified this down, removed a lot of the extra superlative, HTML and stuff, just to make it really, really simple as an example for trading or showing a very simple learning object that tells a story, right? So that's what you'll find in here, and that's what's described inside of this common cartridge. Now, this one here is the LTI one, and by the way, these LTI credentials that we're going to show you work. You are absolutely able to log in with the key and secret. We encourage you to do so. In fact, use that to test your own implementation of Common Cartridge 1.4 as you build it into your LMS, which I'm sure you're all coding right now. And then you'll be able to use those LTI credentials to test this very cartridge. But again, alignment with case, it's all in here. Then of course the resources themselves. So let me jump over and I'll show you one of those resources. And again, this is the same one that he showed you a moment ago, but the LTI credentials, we set them up as extensions. And the reason why we wanted to do that is to kind of show you, you can put anything in an extension. So as you develop your own application, so your learning platform or your own ed tech tool with Common Cartridge 1.4 support, you can include any extensions that you want. And in fact, you could even go so far as to include LTI credentials, including the key and secret, right into a Common Cartridge. Now, we strongly discourage you from doing that because that is a security issue. But the point is that in this case, it's a perfectly valid example to show you how we leverage extensions to convey custom information. So this validates. It's still perfectly valid. It's not in a comment somewhere. It's an extension that, if we were building an ed tech platform today on this call, we'd be able to support the import of this type of function. So this key and secret, like I mentioned, is legit. You can run it and you would be able to connect to these resources. So let me jump over to the non-LTI one. So I want to show you this one here because this is where we get to that cartridge of record piece. Now, the one on the left, the LTI one, that is all LTI. And we wanted you to be able to access this one and use it, particularly if you're building Common Cartridge 1.4 support. This would be very easy for you to test. So it sort of emulates a thin Common Cartridge setup. But the one on the right represents the more thick Common Cartridge, a more traditional one. You could have LTI in here too, no limitation. It's just we figured an A and B would be the most simple. But in this particular Common Cartridge, this is where the actual files are stored themselves. So if we scroll through, it looks very similar at the beginning, right? So we've got all the case alignments, we've got all the metadata surrounding, the files that are contained. Here's the origin story. But we also have the addition of things like this. So this is a closed caption file for the purposes of accessibility. And we've included that in the package and called out for it. So again, if you wanted to support that type of capability, you can do so by simply referring to this resource. And again, it's all flagged with the right accessibility metadata. So really, really powerful for the ability to distribute content that really isn't traditional web-based content, because this VTT file is I'll show you, it's really just a running list of all the text that's said in one of the videos. And that video is included within that Common Cartridge as well. And that is for you guys to use. Now these closed captions are embedded within the object as well. So in other words, it's inside of the video file. But what if you wanted to provide a text version of the video? What if you wanted to say, well, maybe you have students who have visual impairments. So why not render this text for them as something that go through their speech or their text-to-speech system? You could do that. Those are things that can be done directly from the cartridge because the cartridge contains all of the accessibility metadata as well as the data itself for you to serve it with through your platform. So again, this is all about bringing things together across the IMS ecosystem in a way that allows you to create a cartridge of record for your specific learning content. I hope I've driven that point home. So how do we get started? So let me just talk about briefly what you can do for ACT or from ACT's content, and then Bracken, I'll hand it over to you and you can talk a little bit more about some recommendations for resources that they can follow up on. So from the ACT side, you're going to want to use the link that's provided on the very last page to these resources. It just goes to a Google Drive where we have, in fact, I should just bring it up since I've got it here. One second. And it's in this Google Drive location. And again, this link is provided for you at the end of the presentation. It's going to include links to both of these IMS Common Cartridges, so you can download both of them. In addition, we have the content itself. So if you wanted to, pick one of the PDFs or download one of the MP4s, or even the Turbo story, that's the origin story I mentioned, you can download it from here as well. So that's definitely a resource that you're going to want to avail yourself of. In addition to that, you're going to want to connect with us on our working group calls. Definitely avail yourself of that. It's a really great group. It's not that large, so you're not going to have to worry about fighting a whole bunch of different voices per se. Just join us and talk through your use case. We really want to evangelize and get people moving to implementing Common Cartridge 1.4. So we're happy to have the conversations with you on your specific implementation or your struggles in implementing. And between Bracken and myself, we can most likely answer those questions for you. Bracken, do you want to talk a little bit about some other resources?
Yeah, I was trying to show off the updated implementation guide, and I think that's an excellent resource for both the details of implementation, but also just getting a better understanding of the ecosystem emphasis we've been emphasizing. And the cartridges that we've been showing off here and that are linked to the Blaine, those are great examples of 1.4, and we have a whole set of example cartridges, just like we have for previous versions of Common Cartridge, but I'm working on making the example set more useful, like follow more common patterns of how Common Cartridge is used and help people understand them. Right now, they just kind of utilize all the features for testing purposes, but working to make the actual examples that you can use for testing follow common patterns and help people use them as learning tools and not just as testing tools. And so that's also in process as part of our promotion of Common Cartridge 1.4. So I think the new implementation guide is really the best resource out there for getting up to speed on the specific specification.
Awesome. All right, so a lot of this is just reiteration, but I definitely want you guys to leave with, this is the TLDR of TLDRs, right? If you didn't take a screenshot of the TLDR, you really should have, because that was everything. But here's the wrap up, right? So we try to distill Common Cartridge down. What does it do? It allows you to distribute your stuff. It allows you to align your stuff. It allows you to store your stuff and then expand your stuff, right? So those are the big takeaways. And that is something that Common Cartridge in the past has just not been able to do, fully realized across the entire IMS ecosystem. So it really is the cartridge you've been waiting for. Can't tell you how excited I am to be at this point where we can really say Common Cartridge has gotten some huge love. What inspired the color palette here with all the rainbow and all the love, because Common Cartridge finally has gotten the love that it needs to really be something that's game-changing for not just LMS companies, but for you and your content business or your curriculum company or your ed tech supplying company. A lot of functions in here for you. And as I mentioned, this brings everything together throughout the ecosystem. And you can always jump on IMS to get started, but there are a couple of additional links that I did want to share with you. And that is in this resources section here. So definitely use these short links. Go to bit.ly/common cartridge. It is case sensitive, so to keep that in mind. And then our that Google Drive location that I just showed you is available here at ACT CC14 example. And then of course you can always connect with Bracken and myself over Twitter or LinkedIn. Please do connect with us through IMS as well. And as I mentioned, please do join us on those calls that we have once a month. It's only once a month, so it's not a long commitment, but definitely want to join the working group and talk through your implementation. So on behalf of me, ACT, thank you guys so much for being here. We're gonna turn it over to questions. Bracken, do you want to say goodbye and kick off the questions?
Yeah. I won't say goodbye yet, but happy for any questions or comments on this. Again, Blaine and I are starting to go into evangelism mode, so you might be noticing us around proclaiming Common Cartridge. So we're happy to start now with any questions you have, and we've been answering them in chat as they came up too. Any questions from anybody?
Can they take the mic? I'm not sure if that's possible.
I don't know. I think. Let me check. If you can unmute, just do it in the chat, and I can unmute you probably. The schedule is the 4th Tuesday of the month. I wasn't ready to answer that, Monica. I think
That
I
sounds
think it's the
right.
4th Tuesday of every month.
That sounds right.
I'll pull up the schedule. Asking the easy but hard questions.
Yeah, you always come prepared with the, the hard stuff, but the easy ones, they go right by. Yeah, we'd love to have you, Monica, at the, and I hope I'm saying your name right. We'd love to have you at the working group calls. Like I said, there's not a ton of people there. It's not a huge group. We hope to grow that to get a lot more voices in that group, particularly as we get towards implementation. And now that the standard is final and that it is final, right?
No, am I muted? No, we have to wait till there's 2 implementations. But.
Okay, forgive me, but we're on the cusp. So definitely join us and let's talk about your use cases and your needs and where we want to grow for the next version.
The next Common Cartridge meeting is October 26th, which looks like the 4th Tuesday. Yeah, so 4th Tuesday of the month. So.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, feel free to hang out, guys. If you have any more questions, we have the room to the top of the hour, so we'll hang out for the next 5 or so minutes, 5, 10, 15 minutes. And if you have any more questions, but otherwise, have a fantastic rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Hope you get a lot out of it. Hope you got a lot out of this as well. And don't forget to contact us.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.